Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ashok. Today with this video, I'm going to start a new video series on Apex triggers interview preparation, where in this first video, we will cover introduction and most of the basics about triggers. And in coming videos, we will cover scenario-based theoretical and practical interview questions related to triggers, which are commonly asked in Salesforce developer interviews or in technical interviews. And why I started this series? Because when I interview Salesforce developers, I often begin with questions related to Apex triggers, and I also encountered same in most of the interviews. And this is because triggers are very important feature in Salesforce, especially for developers. And if you have a strong command over triggers, then it will make your life much easier in terms of day-to-day development and during interviews as well. So if you are a beginner who wants to learn trigger from scratch, like what are triggers and how to start writing them, and also looking for some practice scenarios, or if you are preparing only for interviews, in both cases this video series will help you a lot. So please watch all the videos of this series till the end. Alright. Now let's have a look on agenda that we will cover as part of this video. So as I said, today we will mostly focus on trigger fundamentals. So it can help you to learn or recap basics and will be very helpful in interviews and in coming videos as well. So today first we will start with what are triggers, and then we will see where and how we can create triggers, and later we will see how many types of triggers we have in Apex, and along with that we will also learn about trigger events and context variables, and then we will understand when should we use Apex triggers, because there are lots of tools available in Salesforce. So in what kind of use cases we should use triggers, that we will see in this point. And at last we will see what all best practices we should follow while writing Apex triggers. Okay, and please watch this video till the end, because these all points are very important in day-to-day development and interviews as well. So let's start with the first point and discuss what are triggers. Alright, so as I said in previous video of order of execution, like Salesforce is the cloud-based software company which has many pre-built applications, and those applications are generic, or we can say initially same for all the customers. And if customers want to use those applications, then first they need to buy subscription, and once they'll start using, they might require some customization on top of that generic application, because every business or customer has their different business rules and processes, and Salesforce offers generic set of functionalities, right? Now, in order to perform customization or to implement custom logics, Salesforce provides many programmatic and declarative tools, and one of them we have trigger. Okay, and if we talk about triggers, then we can say trigger is the programming way to perform customization on DML operations, or we can say if you want to inject custom business logic just before or after record gets saved into Salesforce database, like on record insert, update or delete operations, then triggers can help us. For example, let's say we want to apply complex validations just before record gets saved into database, or we want to insert or update data in related or non-related objects, then we can go with triggers. Though in Salesforce, there are lots of declarative tools available which can help us to inject automated customization on DML operations. So when especially triggers should be used over these declarative tools, that we will discuss in a separate point sometime later. But in nutshell, if you want to automatically apply any kind of business logic before or after record gets saved into database, then triggers can help us to achieve that. And as we have discussed, triggers are the programmatic way to perform customization. So here we need to write code in Apex language, and all the active triggers will be invoked automatically on DML operations. It means we don't have to call triggers separately. They will automatically get called when we perform DML operation on that particular object, like insert, update, delete or undelete operations. Okay, so in simple words, we can say triggers are the feature of Apex programming which help us to inject custom logics before or after DML operations. Okay, now I think you have a fair idea about what are triggers. So let's move on the next point and discuss where and how we can create trigger. Okay, so first let's see where we can create triggers. Then first option we have using developer console, which is the primary IDE provided by Salesforce for developers. Then second option we have by navigating into triggers section in object manager. I mean, once we open particular object in object manager, then there we have a section called triggers. So whatever triggers are created on that object, those we can see there, and also create new by clicking on new button. And we can also create triggers using VS Code if we have installed Salesforce extension. Okay, so there might be more ways, but these are the primary ways which we generally use to create triggers in Salesforce. And now let's see how to create triggers practically, and we will use developer console for that. So let's open our Salesforce org, and here click on this gear icon, and if you have valid permission, then here you will see an option called developer console. So let's click on this. Okay, now we are in developer console, and here if you want to create new trigger, then we have to click on file, then new, then select Apex trigger option. And now here in this box, first we need to provide name of our trigger, and we can use any relevant name here. So for now, let's type account trigger for demo purpose. And now in second box, we need to select object on which we want to create trigger. So here in this drop down, you will see all the objects which are available in our org. It means you can select any object on which you want to create trigger. So for now, let's select account and click on submit. Alright, now you can see a new trigger has been created with a specific syntax, where first we need to write trigger keyword, and then we need to write name of trigger, which is account trigger in our case, and then we have on keyword, and after on we need to provide object name on which we want to create trigger. So in our case this is account, and now in parentheses we need to provide trigger event, which can be multiple. And what are trigger events, that we will cover in few minutes. But yeah, this is the syntax to create any trigger in Apex, and whenever we create a new trigger, that will automatically become active. It means the code which we will write here will start executing on DML operations which we perform on account object. Okay, and now let's see what all types of triggers we have. So in Apex we have two types of triggers. First is before and second is after. And when we should use before trigger, so if you want to run Apex code or perform any logic just before database operation, then we should go with the before trigger. For example, let's say before inserting order details, you want to again check available quantity of item, then you can use before trigger to apply this validation, because we obviously want to check available quantity before data inserting into database, right? Or we can say if you want to apply any kind of validations, then we should go with the before triggers. And it's not only about the validations, but the key concept is if you want to apply any logic before database operations, like before data insert, update or delete, then before triggers are helpful. Okay, and at the other side, if you want to perform any logic just after database operations, like after inserting order details, you also want to insert shipping or delivery records, then we can use after triggers in this case. Or in other words, if you want to perform some operations on related records, then we generally use after triggers. But again, the key concept is if you want to perform any logic after database operations, then after triggers can help us. Okay, and we will discuss more on this point with scenarios in coming videos. Okay, and now let's discuss what are trigger events. So all the active triggers will automatically invoke on some database operations or events, and there are 7 trigger events we have in Salesforce. Due to those, triggers can be called, like first we have before insert. So if you want to perform any logic before new record insert into database, then we can use this event. And next we have after insert, which can help us to inject logic after record insert into database. And similarly we have before update, before delete and after delete, and also after undelete. One thing you need to note here, that we don't have before undelete event. Why? Because at that time we don't have that record in our database. And with the trigger definition, we need to specify when this trigger will be called. For example, let's say we want to execute some code just before data insert or update in account object. Then here in parentheses, we will provide trigger events, and these can be multiple. I mean, we can use multiple trigger events on same trigger, separating by comma, like this. Now what we are saying here, that this trigger will call just before data insert and update on account object, right? And similarly, if you want to add more events, then you are allowed. Even all the 7 events we can use on same trigger. And in that case, trigger may be called multiple times in same transaction. Like for example, first for before insert, then for after insert, and maybe for before and after update as well, if you have used workflow field update on same object, right? So in nutshell, execution of trigger depends on the events, like how many events we have used on that trigger. Okay, and as of now, if you are not clear that in which situation we should use before or when we should use after, so that's completely fine, because in upcoming practical videos we will discuss a lot that which type of trigger or event should be used when. Okay, and now let's move on the next topic and discuss what are context variables. So we can say in Apex triggers, context variables are the special variables that provide information about the runtime context in which the trigger is being executed, and these variables help us to get important details and make decisions based on the specific execution context of the trigger. It simply means using context variables we can get information about current execution of trigger. For example, here we have used multiple trigger events in single trigger like before insert and before update. It means this same trigger will get called for before insert operation and for before update operation, right? And now let's say we want to execute different code in case of before insert and different in before update. So here in trigger, how we can decide that condition, or how we will get to know whether this trigger get called for before insert context or for before update context, right? So using context variables, we can get such kind of details at runtime and use these context variables in conditions. Okay, so now let's see what all context variables we have in triggers. So here first we have is insert. It will return true value when trigger was fired due to insert operation. So if you want to specify some process which should be executed only in case of insert operation, not in update, delete and undelete operations, then we can use this context variable to add condition, right? And similarly, if you want to add some logics for update only, then you can use isUpdate variable in condition, because this will return true value only when we perform update operation, and isDelete will return true when delete operation is performing, and undelete will return true when a trigger was fired after a record is recovered from recycle bin. Okay, and if you want to check trigger execution type like before or after, then we can use these variables. I mean, each before will return true if trigger was fired before any record was saved into DB, and each after will return true if trigger was fired after all the records were saved into DB. Okay, so at runtime, if you want to check trigger execution type, then we can use these variables in condition. For example, let me open my developer console again, and here in account trigger, let's say we want to perform some different logics for before insert and something different for before update. Then how we can use context variables here? So here first, if you want to add logic for before insert, then using isBefore variable, we will check that is it in before context or not, and using isInsert variable, we will check that is it in insert context or not. So we'll write condition like this. Okay, so all these context variables are available in trigger class, and this is how we can access these context variables like trigger.name of context variable. So here we have used trigger.isBefore and trigger.isInsert, and these are boolean variables. So if both will have value true, then program will enter in this condition. So here we can write our code which should execute only in case of before insert. Okay, so for demo purpose, let's write debug statement. And similarly, we can write condition for before update as well. Like instead of this is insert, we will use is update. Okay, now this message will print only we try to insert new record, and this will print when we try to update record. And similarly, we can add conditions for after context or for delete and undelete operations as well. Okay, so this is how using context variables we can run code as per different operations. And is executing will return true if the current context for the Apex code is a trigger. What does it mean? It means, let's say we have an Apex method which is getting called from multiple places, like from Visualforce pages, LWC component, and from triggers also. And now let's say you want to perform some logic only when that method get called from trigger. Then we can use is executing context variable to add condition. And how we can use that we will see in upcoming videos. Okay, now next we have size. So at runtime, if we want to check how many records are getting processed by this trigger, then we can use size variable, which will return count of records those are involved in trigger invocation. And next we have operation type. So this variable returns an enum of type system.trigger operation. I mean, in system class, we have an enum called trigger operation, which has following values like before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, and after undelete. So this operation type variable will get value out of these according to the trigger execution context. Like for example, let's say if trigger is get called due to before insert event, then we will get this before insert as value in operation type variable. And similarly, if trigger get called for before update context, then we will get before update as value, right? So for code segregation, instead of using multiple if-else conditions, we can use this variable and write code in better way. And how we can write code, that we will cover in a separate video with practical use cases. Okay. And now in trigger, if you want to get records due to those trigger get called, like let's say we are updating an account record, and now in trigger we want to get details that user has entered to check and apply some validations. So now in trigger, if you want to get those account records, then here we have 4 context variables like trigger.new, new map, old, and old map. And if we talk about this new variable, then we can say this will return a list of the new version of the S-object records. Why list? Because a trigger can process up to 200 records at a time, though from UI, user will generally work on single record at a time, but there are lots of other ways to perform DML operations. By that, we can insert or update multiple records at a time, like using Apex or any data loader tools, right? So for example, let's say we are trying to insert 500 records in single transaction, then our trigger will call 3 times for first 200, then second 200, and finally for last 100 records, right? So that's why the data type of new variable is list. Okay, and it will contain new version of S-object records. What does it means? It means, let's say we are coming for update operation in trigger, then whatever values user has modified on top of previous, those values will be available in new variable. Like let's say while updating account record, user has modified account name, then in new variable, user will get account name with modified account name. But at the opposite side, if you want to get older values for some comparison or for other regions, then that you will get in old variable. So trigger.new will always contain new or modified values, and old will contain whatever was existing there in database. Okay. And next we have new map. So as name suggests, this is the map of IDs to new version of the S-object records, which means it has map data type. And map is the pair of key values. I mean, in map, we can store key and values together. So here in new map, we will get record ID as key and record object as value. So anywhere, if we have a requirement where we want both ID and record, then instead of new, we should use new map for newer version of records. And similarly, we have old map with older version of records. Please consider old here. Okay. And these context variables will not always contain values. Like while insertion in before context, trigger.new map will be null. Why? Because before inserting record into database, there will be no record ID generated. That will be generated after record insertion. And this map is the combination of key and value, and ID will be used as key. So without key, we can't store any data in map. So that's why new map will be null in case of before insert context. And also while insert operation, we are inserting fresh new record into database. So there will be no old record available in database. So that's why old and old map will also null in case of before insert. And in case of after insert context, new map will have values, because as we have discussed, as and when record will insert into database, then record ID will be generated. But again, old and old map will be null, right? So you can refer this table to know which context variable will have value in particular context and which will be null. Okay. And how we can use these variables in trigger, that we will cover in upcoming practical videos. Okay. And now next we have when we should use triggers. So in Salesforce, Using Apex triggers, we can implement almost any kind of customization, but the main problem is here we need to write code for everything. And Salesforce always recommend to use no code or low code tools for customization. I mean, as we have discussed, in Salesforce, there are lots of declarative tools available which can help us to perform automation or inject custom logics on DML operations without writing code, like validation rules, workflows, process builders, and flows. And Salesforce always recommend to use these tools whenever possible. But these tools are point and click tools which can help us to achieve simple and specific requirements. Though nowadays Salesforce working a lot on flows to enhance their capacity and capabilities, and using them we can almost replace triggers. I mean, using record trigger flows, we can perform lots of the actions without triggers as well. But still, while working in real-time and big enterprise applications, we generally face some complex requirements which cannot be achieved by using any point and click tools or bit complex to achieve. Then in that case, we have to use Apex triggers. For example, to apply complex logics and validations, we can use validation rules to apply simple validations. But sometimes we used to get requirements where we need to add dynamic validations or need to check lots of conditions and apply validations on the basis of some other object's data or by performing calculation on different object fields, right? So in these cases, triggers are the most suitable way because here we can use SOQL to query data from different objects and do calculations. And next we have when working with cross-object operations like inserting and updating data into related and non-related objects. Though this requirement can be easily achieved using record trigger flows as well. But if you have to work on lots of records and need to apply lots of conditions and need to make dynamic decisions, then we should go with the triggers. And if you want to do bulk data processing, then better if you'll go with the triggers because flows generally consume more CPU limits as compared to triggers. So for bulk data processing, we should always choose triggers to avoid CPU limits. And as of now, we can't capture and delete operation in any declarative tools, including flows. So to perform custom operations on undelete event, we only have to write triggers. Okay. So these are the few scenarios where we need to write triggers over other automation tools. But still, if you are writing Apex triggers for any requirement, then always first we need to check that if this requirement can be achieved using any automation tools and requirement is simple and straightforward, then instead of writing custom triggers, we should go with the point and click tools. Okay. And next we have what all best practices we should follow while writing Apex triggers. So these are few best practices which we should follow while writing Apex triggers, like one trigger per object, bulkified triggers, avoid SOQL queries and DML statements inside loops, logicless triggers, avoid hard coding IDs, avoid recursive triggers, governor limit consideration, avoid long running operations, avoid calling based from trigger. So these are the few best practices which we should follow while writing Apex triggers. And instead of explaining these points theoretically here, better if I create a separate video which covers these all points with practical examples and use cases. So it will be very helpful for you to understand. Alright, then that's it in this video where we have discussed about most of the basic topics related to Apex triggers. And in next video, we will cover trigger best practices with practical examples and use cases. And if this video helped you to learn something new, then please help me through by like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel, and also share your feedback and questions in comments. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next video.